There's this meeting in Istanbul coming on Thursday, and from my understanding, Zelensky says he's going to go in person, but he will only talk to Putin. So what's happening here?
Yeah. Well, the Russians have declared that they are sending in a negotiating team to Istanbul. They will be there on Thursday. They haven't actually named the members of the team, but they have said, officially declared they are sending a negotiating team. And now, Zelensky at first was insisting on, ceasefire first. The Europeans were insisting on it too, ceasefire, and or no negotiations. Ceasefire and then negotiations was their position, and they seemed to be firm on it. And I think it was back on Tuesday or something. They said, yeah, we're just hours away from imposing the sanctions if the U.S. doesn't agree to our ultimatum, though they didn't use the word ultimatum, but what in fact was an ultimatum. If they don't agree to it, the sanctions will go into effect, at midnight tonight. Well, when the clock kept on ticking, they haven't. And I think the reason is that Trump pulled the rug out from under him. Because when he heard that it seemed like he had been part of that team, that he had been roped in, to be part of the European Kiev team, that presented this ultimatum. But when Putin came back and with his counter proposal, Trump leapt on it and said, "This is great. This is what has to be done." And so they would just pull the rug out from under their feet, and they had to, okay. So they have delayed the sanctions. They said, okay, yeah, now there will be negotiations. And Zelensky, who was saying that no way, you have to have a ceasefire first. He's flip-flopped too. But now he's saying that I'm going to go there personally, and Putin has to show up. And if he doesn't, then, that'll show that they're not serious. Because, this is the way he explains it, Putin is the guy who makes the decisions. So there's no point in talking to anybody else, which is just absurd. This is real low IQ. I don't know that he really believes it is, but it just seems so silly that anybody would take that seriously. It's sort of like saying, well, even if Putin were a dictator, which he isn't, not by, any stretch of that definition. But even if he were, a dictator normally can send his deputies. He can authorize them, to represent them and give them in negotiations. That's the way things are normally done. It's kind of like saying you go to a country and a police officer tries to arrest you for a traffic violation or something, or fine you. And you say, no, you can't do that. I'm not accepting your authority, because I know in your country, the only guy who makes decisions is, the big boss upstairs. So I'm not listening to you. Yeah, it's on the same level. It's just ridiculous. So anyway, but it's what Zelensky does. He just wants to be there, kind of gate crashing. And then that's what he's going to, I think he's going to try to do in Istanbul.
Do you think that
I don't think it's not impossible that Putin will show up, but I think it's highly unlikely.
Do you think it would be a good move if he showed up?
I don't think so. I mean,
maybe, it could be, I don't know. Right? It could be. It just calls.
Yeah, or maybe out. I don't know.
Right. It's just like Zelensky's making this ridiculous demand because he thinks that Putin won't show up, and then if Putin shows up, and Putin, that he's calm, cool, and collected.
Yeah. Right.
Zelensky is going to be probably coked up out of his mind and going nuts. And if there are other people that are in the room that are involved with it, like if Steve Witkoff and Kellogg are there, then, things start to become apparent that, okay, Zelensky is being unhinged. We have this cool rational actor that's actually trying to get to a settlement. I think it'll backfire on him. So
it could. I don't know. It's a really crazy situation. And
but I've just,
that's kind of a circus.
Right. But everything the past 2 or 3 years is a bit of a circus. And with Trump coming into office, it's been, everything has been more unorthodox, like the way that deals are being settled and the rhetoric that we have, it doesn't seem to be going by the norms anymore. Yeah. So it's just
but also, it's not working. I mean, like in the case of Russia, Ukraine, the Trump approach just hasn't been working.
Right. But that's why I'm saying this might work.
I don't see how it would work. I mean, again, I think the truth is the two sides are so far apart that, there is not going to be any meeting of minds and any, handshake deal. That's just not going to happen. It's just no way. And it doesn't really, I don't think bringing the respective presidents into the same room doesn't do any good. I think it would be a good thing if, like, the negotiating teams met quietly, and it should just be quiet because it's a mistake to put a lot of expectations. They're very far apart. But as they start talking, that's a good thing. If you make it a regular thing, and over time, I think you could eventually start to see some shifts, especially as battlefield realities continue to, go against the Ukrainians. At some point, they might see that, oh God, we do have to make a deal. They're just not going to do it now. Now, well, it's kind of interesting, what is actually the Ukrainian, what are they looking for in this? They had always been against any kind of ceasefire. And then in the last couple of months, they caved in on that and they started to agree to a ceasefire. And I think maybe it was largely because of pressure that was put on them by the U.S. But it may be more than that. They used to argue, or at least it was argued in the press. I remember a year ago and earlier that, a ceasefire would be a terrible idea because it would give the Russians a time to rest and rearm but you're not hearing that, because I think everybody knows that the Ukrainians are losing, and the Ukrainians have to know it better than anybody. Maybe some of these Europeans don't really know that the Ukrainians are losing or how badly they're losing, because I think they get their information from the Ukrainians themselves, and the Ukrainians always try to paint a rosy picture. But they themselves have to know that they're losing, and they themselves have to know that a ceasefire actually would be very helpful at this point, especially with the likelihood, as the Ukrainians themselves are starting to report, that there is a major offensive looming on the horizon. And if they really see that coming and they see they're losing, go for a ceasefire. And so that there may actually be a hope among the Ukrainians that there is a ceasefire, but at the same time, it just seems like they're not going about it in a realistic way, because again, it's like joining the Europeans to making this all these ridiculous this ultimatums. That's just obviously not going to work, and they have to know it. So they still haven't kind of. It seems clear to me they haven't climbed down from their kind of self-created PR position. They still aren't really grappling with reality, but maybe at some point they will. They'll have to. I mean, the reality will become grimmer and grimmer to the point where they simply have to. I don't see it happening right now, but if we start negotiations, maybe eventually it will happen.
So do you think negotiations are going to start on Thursday? I mean, just tomorrow?
Well, I'm afraid it's not going to go anywhere, because it looks like the Ukrainians are going into this, certainly Zelensky himself, he's not going into it, with any sincerity. It's, he sees it as another PR, event, which is just part of the information war. And he can try to, again, make the Russians look like the orcs from the East. And if you were really serious about a ceasefire, you would send a negotiating team and you would start to make some goodwill gestures. That's another thing, is that you look like some of these ceasefires that the Russians institute. You say, well, yeah, that's only a 1-day ceasefire. That's a 3-day ceasefire. But if the Ukrainians had agreed to them, those would have been goodwill gestures and would have actually signaled to the Russians that, hey, we are serious about talking. But their failure to observe them kind of, I think, sends a signal that we are not serious about this. And above all, there was that energy infrastructure ceasefire that was 30 days long, and that Zelensky verbally agreed to. But they, in fact, intensified their attacks on Russian energy infrastructure during that time. So, I mean, that just, again, sends a signal, we're not really interested in a ceasefire or peace with you at all. So, even if they're starting to realize that, hey, maybe a ceasefire, they still, it seems like they still haven't really come to grips with it, and they're still fighting this information war, and they're still doing whatever they can to sabotage any kind of Russian, effort at starting negotiations.
But they are sending a team, or Zelensky's going in person.
Yeah, and that's what I've heard. I don't know if they're sending a team or not. And
He
Zelensky
surely
says,
isn't going to roll in solo, is he?
no, he's got to be some people with him,
Right.
I don't know. I don't see how it's going to go anywhere. I don't think, again, the two sides are so far apart, and the Ukrainians, if the Ukrainians were at least kind of sobered up, maybe got off their coke or whatever it is, then you would say, okay, well, don't expect any breakthroughs here, but maybe this become the beginning of a process that could lead to something. But we're talking about, a year or 2 years down the road, probably. That's a realistic thing to do. But there are, I think, unrealistic expectations among people who, very properly hope for peace. And there seems to me to be a lack of sincerity. Maybe you can see on both sides, certainly on the Ukrainian side. I mean, the Russians, at least, are sending a team. That's what you do if you're going to do negotiations. If it's just Zelensky on the other side, that's just absurd. That shows that you're just grandstanding. You're not actually serious about negotiations.
Interesting. I know I've heard rumors that both Steve Witkoff and General Kellogg are going to be going to Istanbul on Thursday as well. So
right.
Who knows? I don't even know if this thing is happening. Just because of what Zelensky is saying I will only talk to Putin.
Right.
I'm going there. Putin, you better show up. It's almost like you in middle school when you dealing with somebody like meet me outside after school. In the parking lot kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's the feeling I get. It's and so then usually those things don't pan out. It's like, I'm not going to meet you in the parking lot. Whatever, I'm going home. But I was thinking that if Kellogg and Witkoff are going, maybe because we're always wondering like what's Kellogg doing? Kellogg seems to be presenting plans that are just completely unrealistic, completely ignoring all of Russia's interests and demands, and ignoring the fact that Russia is clearly winning this war. So we have to acknowledge what Russia is saying. And then Witkoff seems to have an understanding of Russia's position and is more, I wouldn't say in Russia's camp, but is willing to talk to them. I mean, we have to understand we're a co-belligerent here. But I'm wondering if the idea is if they send both Witkoff and Kellogg, it just seems like that's a weird combo. They're not on the same page. But maybe the idea is that Kellogg is kind of in the Ukrainian camp. Witkoff is more in the Russian camp. And just that in itself might lend to the ability to have a bit of a dialogue, because you have Kellogg that is sort of representing the Ukrainians in a way, and then Witkoff that's kind of representing the Russians in a way. And it can maybe just bring them a little bit closer to kind of have some middle ground. Do you think that's possible? I mean, is that what the thinking is? Because you're wondering, like, why is Kellogg even here? What's Kellogg doing?
Yeah, there's first of all, I've heard that they're going there. They're as observers. So I don't know.
They're not their lawyers.
I don't know if that means that they, sit at the table, or they are in the next room, or if they, stand against the wall and watch or something. I don't
binoculars,
know right. I really don't know what that means. But yeah, so there's a real question. Is like, why does Trump have Kellogg there? I think it's clear the guy that he likes is Witkoff. He's his actual personal friend, and trusts him to do just about everything under the sun. But Kellogg is constantly going on TV and saying things like, essentially just declaring that like the NATO requirement, that NATO non-membership requirement that the Russians have put forward, is that something that we can ignore, or so somewhere down the road we could change that? And he's saying these things out loud, and he's talking about this plan to send European troops there. What we're hearing from Macron and Starmer, he's clearly on board with that, and he's saying all this out loud, and it's often contradicting things that Trump had said earlier, or Witkoff had said, and I don't know why Trump doesn't tell him to just shut up, but this is something that we've seen all along. It's just chaos within this administration. They're not speaking with a unified voice. And, at one time, I think like Marco Rubio was saying, he was saying that, the ceasefire They have to agree to it, or there will be consequences. No ceasefire, no negotiations. And then Trump went off, and I think he even said that after the first time Trump made that statement. That, oh yeah, wonderful negotiations. But the policy, it was still, had been worked out within the administration, within the State Department, that, oh, no, we're doing the European plan. But then now, when you contact the State Department, or a reporter does, they say, yeah, no, we don't know what's going to happen on Thursday. And for the moment, the threats of sanctions, and those are off the table, at least for the time being. It's just total chaos. I don't know what's going to happen.
So do you think that there will be at least some type of talks on Thursday, or do you think we
There
really
might
don't
be.
know?
I really don't know. I think only a fool will predict is what happens. It's going to be, I don't know. Maybe they'll actually put on clown outfits and run around in circles. I don't know.
The whole thing's so crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll wait and see. I'm sure we'll have a lot of talk about on Friday.